Okay, so I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today. And let me just give you a little bit of background here. So Jeff Blade and Brent Rockwood are connected through Butler University. Jeff is a graduate and on the board of trustees. Jeff's current position right now is president of Herff Jones. Herff Jones, you may recall, or you may already have knowledge of Herff Jones. They do a lot of the celebratory items that you might have around graduations and other sort of milestone events in your life for people around you, including stoles and jewelry and other things that are pretty much part of that whole experience around those milestone events. Herff Jones is headquartered here in Central Indiana, as is Butler University, and I'd like to welcome Brent Rockwood as well. Brent is the Chief of Staff and Vice President for Butler University. Brent was the primary character instrumental in formulating the COVID plan around Butler, and can speak to some of the pieces there. But before I go any further, I'd like to please invite Jeff and Brent to just give a quick overview of their background, what their leadership sort of style and philosophy and approach is. And then we'll get into the questions. So why don't we start with Jeff, if you would like to take it away.
Sure, that would be great. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be with all of you, and appreciate Alpha Kappa Psi for hosting this event. So in terms of my background, first of all, my affiliation with Alpha Kappa Psi. So I had the opportunity while I was at Butler University to be the founding president of the Lambda Upsilon chapter of Alpha Kappa Psi. So that's how so I originally got affiliated. And then I had the opportunity to serve on the Alpha Kappa Psi board in the early 2000s for several years. So a lot of admiration and respect for the organization and what it does for students and alumni. In terms of my background, as Steve mentioned, undergraduate in accounting from Butler University, and then a 30-plus year career in finance and operations. Have had the opportunity to be the CFO of 3 public companies, including helping to take Vera Bradley Designs, an Indiana-based company, public in 2010. Had the opportunity to serve as CEO of an organization called Matilda Jane Clothing for the last 7 years, and joined Herff Jones in February as president to help with a transformation of the company, a storied 100-plus-year-old company in need of revitalization. So glad to be with all of you today. And in terms of leadership, my leadership philosophy, it's really grounded in the work of Robert Greenleaf and servant leadership. So I got introduced to Greenleaf's work in the late 90s by a professor from Butler University when we were talking about leadership, and he mentioned to me that what I was describing sounded like Greenleaf's work in servant leadership, and it really has been a way for me to name the way I think about organizations and people in leadership, which is being able to be of service and supporting one another, and that servant leadership is certainly built into what Alpha Kappa Psi is all about, and also into the principal business leader framework. So look forward to answering questions and talking with you this afternoon.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that background. Brent, would you like to go next, please?
Yes. Well, first off, thanks to you, Steve, and Jason, and Mackenzie for the invitation. It's great to be with all of you today. And I'm a big believer in value-based leadership, and I don't have as much kind of background and experience with Alpha Kappa Psi, but what I've seen, I'm a big believer in. And when I think of kind of success in business, or really kind of any kind of line of work, there's kind of 2 components. You have the IQ and then kind of the EQ, or the emotional intelligence, and you need kind of the IQ to be there. But really what I have seen kind of firsthand as the separator of success are people who understand leadership, kind of teamwork, problem solving, communication skills, conflict management, how to deal with failure. All these these things that you all are working on. So a little bit about me and my background. I'm a graduate of Butler University, class of 2000. After I graduated, I worked here locally at Eli Lilly. I started off in sales, had sales training and marketing roles. Went to business school for 2 years, then got into management consulting, which was quite fascinating. Got to work with executive teams with kind of Fortune 500 companies. And then one of those executive teams hired me on in the energy industry, where I had roles in kind of marketing, communications. I led government affairs, community relations, investor relations. And then prior to Butler, I was at the Indiana Pacers in the NBA, serving as senior vice president of their corporate and social and community responsibility. And I got a connection with President James Danko of Butler University, who I've always kind of admired his leadership and what he's done here at the university over the past 10 years. And it really was an incredible opportunity to join President Danko and his leadership team, to return kind of back home, so to speak, to my alma mater, to serve as vice president and chief of staff, which has been an incredible experience working with people like President Danko, but then also the people within our community, such as our trustees and Jeff Blade and many others. So it's been a great experience. And then just quickly, just my leadership kind of preference is very much a servant leadership as well. That's what I am accustomed to. I've admired leaders in my career that practice servant leadership, and that's something that I uphold and try to put into practice both in my professional and personal lives.
Thanks, Brent, for the background. A question for you, since we talked a little about COVID and your role with Butler. My understanding is that you were instrumental in helping develop Butler's approach in response to COVID. And can you talk a little bit about, just from your perspective, and maybe even trying to circle back into the idea of servant leadership, how did you approach that situation with COVID, knowing that there were so many sort of unknowns, right? Like how do you make decisions? How do you find a path forward in those sorts of circumstances?
Yeah, great question. And I think to start off, it'd be helpful for me just to kind of explain my role as chief of staff, because that's a fairly broad term. So I was hired roughly kind of 2 years ago to serve as chief of staff of the university in the president's office. And that has kind of two main components, and that's managing projects internally, representing the president's office on major strategic initiatives, but then also there's an external component as well. And then I have kind of this third responsibility, just given my background in sales, marketing, communications, PR. I oversee our marketing and communications division as well. So in that job responsibility, one of my roles has been serving as the leader of our crisis management team. And that's a team that a lot of entities will have to manage any type of crisis that could hit the business or the organization. So very early on in the pandemic, it impacted us prior to the virus arriving domestically, because we had students overseas in study abroad programs in China and Italy. So I assembled our crisis management team. And through that process of my leadership role there, President Danko appointed me and tasked me with kind of leading the COVID-19 efforts on our campus community. And a lot of universities and a lot of organizations, for that matter, didn't have a pandemic playbook, and certainly not to this magnitude as we expected. So I really at that time didn't know what I was I don't think any of us did, what we're getting ourselves into. But it was, looking back on it, and it's still going, obviously, but it's nowhere near where it was in that first year of kind of constant crisis mode. It was the biggest leadership, challenge of my professional career, but at the same time, it was the most kind of rewarding experience that I've had. So what I had to do, it was kind of a complete disruption to my job, to where COVID-19 became my full-time job. And I'm looking for a business card here because I joked with President Danko that I wanted COVID czar as my title over the past year and a half. But you know, I really had to rely on people, right? I mean, I don't have a medical kind of background, but I have leadership kind of skills that I put into practice in terms of assembling teams. And, you know, our mantra was utilizing the best available information to make the best possible decisions for Butler. So we received guidance, you know, from our trustees like Jeff, those in higher education, public health officials, healthcare business leaders, and others in the community. And our entire goal all along was to create a relatively safer environment on Butler's campus to what was happening in the city, the county, the state, the region, and the nation as well. So it certainly was a significant challenge. I mean, I could go on and on with this, but I think a key to our success was the fact that we assembled, you know, the right people. We had tough conversations. We had kind of our top value of upholding and promoting the health and safety of our campus community, and really having that be kind of our guiding light throughout the pandemic. So it was definitely a challenging experience. It's still ongoing, but it's more kind of maintenance mode. But it was challenging and rewarding at the same time.
Thanks, Brent. I think knowing that you had sort of a guiding principle or a guiding light around the health and well-being of your community as really the starting point that you were trying to achieve going forward is a really important point as far as that guiding star. Jeff, before I jump to you and ask about a leadership challenge you've had with, you know, in crisis or in a similar situation, Brent, could you just talk a little bit more about that value and how you had to come back to that with your team and the people around, especially when you were having to make decisions that maybe other people weren't happy with, but you were trying to make sure that you were all kind of on the same page with the end result you were trying to produce?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, that was one of my kind of biggest kind of leadership kind of learnings throughout this process is that, you know, you need to have that kind of guiding light, and, you know, kudos to our leadership team to kind of really not only buying into it, because it's easy to say that, but then to put it kind of into practice and doing the right thing for our community. And many times we didn't have the answers, right? I mean, we debated things. We had you know, disagreements within our kind of leadership group, but we were all united in that kind of common vision. And one of the big challenges I think that all of us had and that I saw is just that there's a lot of noise out there, and especially with the pandemic, you know, it could be divisive at times. And regardless of what decision we made, somebody was not going to be happy with that decision, right? So, you know, we would make a decision. You know, I'd hear from kind of one segment of the population that we were kind of overreacting to the pandemic, and then that same kind of decision and message we put out, I'd hear from another side that we weren't doing enough, right? So that created a significant challenge to block out the noise, focus on our guiding mission, and that what we're doing to have data-informed decisions to promote health and safety on our campus. And kind of without that, we wouldn't have had kind of the unified vision, I think, within our, not only our leadership team, but all the people working. I mean, we have multiple subgroups kind of working on the project, and really hats off to our Butler community, because our faculty, our staff, our students, and our community members really kind of bought into it by and large. But a leadership lesson to me was you have to block out some of that noise and focus on kind of making decisions, knowing that not everyone's going to support those decisions, but at least they can respect it because of the data and kind of our mission that we were very transparent about and that we put into practice and just didn't talk about.
That's a great point. A great point about trying to stay focused when you know that not everybody is going to be on the same page with every decision, being able to power through that and being willing as a leader to address those concerns and keep consistent with what the message is and what the ultimate goal is. Jeff, so do you have an example on your side of maybe how your leadership style or your values or the sense of mission may have guided you in a certain situation of crisis in your leadership history?
Yeah, give you an example actually from something that's sort of live right now. So as at least in terms of our business here at Herff Jones, and we're about 1,700 team members across the country, 6 manufacturing facilities, and we go to market through independent sales partners. We have about 300 sales partners, and we serve about 40% of the high schools and colleges and universities in the U.S. So very, very diverse stakeholder group. And for us, we're really still in the midst of COVID. And if anything, this later stage of COVID is more challenging from a business perspective than some of the earlier stages. And so we're navigating through a number of things right now. One is return to office. So we still have not, for the professional staff, we still have not returned to office. We were originally going to do so after Labor Day, and with the resurgence of COVID and the Delta variant, decided to postpone that decision until January. And that is coupled with a corporate-wide decision. We're an operating division of a larger company, which is private equity backed by Bain Capital. And through the Bain organization and Varsity Brands and ourselves, we've had the debate about whether to mandate the vaccine or make it voluntary and test. And that is a very polarizing, very controversial issue. And we're having to weigh that in the context of a very tight labor market. So we operate 6 manufacturing plants, each have about 250 or so team members, and with labor shortages, that decision to mandate vaccines could exacerbate that. So that's actually a live debate going on. It has been going on over the last 2 months, and we made a decision recently with input from a wide variety of stakeholders to not mandate the vaccine, but have a testing protocol, which has a cost implication and a logistics implication for us. But we felt like it was the right thing to do, and really trying to respect people's right to a differing of opinion. Because in some of the early debates, it would have been easy to say, look, we're just going to mandate it, and that's the way it's going to be. And if people don't want to work here, too bad. And you just could not make a decision like that when you weighed all of the elements. We're also facing some other really interesting things. Some of you may have heard about, read about, or maybe you yourself are participating in what's being called the Great Resignation. And it is, depending on what you're reading, it would suggest that 40 to 50% of the workforce right now is looking for a new job. And some of that is a result of pent-up demand where people were not making moves during the height of COVID, but also a societal and cultural feeling that folks just need a change. They need to do something new, and there's a lot of things in their life they can't change, but their job they often can. And it comes down to what extent are people feeling valued? To what extent are they working in organizations that have real purpose? And so we're seeing certainly our level of folks that are moving on. And what we're doing is a couple of things. One, trying to remind our leadership team and our organization of hiring managers that while the Great Resignation has challenges and downsides, it's also a great opportunity because we have the opportunity to meet and recruit individuals that in a normal environment wouldn't be looking for a new job. So we're trying to use it as an opportunity to acquire new and in many instances better talent. And then we're also paying very close attention. We just kicked off a project on on redefining the purpose of Herf Jones. So it's a company over time that got fairly comfortable with what they were doing, didn't invest heavily in people, process, technology, and that's part of the revitalization and transformation that we have underway. And part of that is really revisiting what is the true purpose of the organization. Why are we here? What is it that we uniquely do? Why should someone be giving us their time and talent? So, and then the last thing I would touch on is we're also operating in a hyperinflationary environment. So the cost of labor, the cost of inbound freight from Asia, the cost of raw material inputs are skyrocketing. For instance, a year ago, we were paying for hourly labor somewhere in the $10 to $11 an hour range. Today, we're paying 17 to 18 plus if you can even get folks. So labor costs are up 50%. And we're in the process of trying to take price increases, but given the nature of our business, we have a lot of contractual arrangements. We have a lot of uniqueness with our independent sales partners, which makes it very hard to pass along pricing. And so we're having that tough discussion, and we're trying to consult with all of our stakeholders to do what's best. So through all of this, there is an element of just from a leadership standpoint, just trying to be fair and balanced, put servant leadership to work, and trying to serve the best interest of everyone involved.
Jeff, those are great examples. Let me ask and sort of tie together one of the points you made, and then also sort of tie one of the points you made to a slide that we put up earlier around the need in the workplace, the skill sets that are needed in the workplace, and from a leadership perspective and just a general skill set perspective. So you talked about purpose, the organizational purpose, and using a lot of the circumstances that you're talking about that are tough to deal with from a business point of view, but being able to sort of take that opportunity to reset purpose, mission, vision. Can you talk a little bit about that a little bit more? And then maybe as a piece to that, Brent, could you respond in similarly, in a sense, Butler is preparing a lot of the folks that would go work for somebody like Herf Jones and the skill set. So really, Jeff, your company in some respects is receiving the people that Butler might actually send to you. So Jeff, could you talk about resetting purpose? And then Brent, could you follow up on that with discussing how has Butler reassessed its purpose relative to the working environment, career development, the skills that are needed in the workplace? So Jeff, will you jump on purpose first?
Sure. Yeah, the reason that we're focused on purpose throughout my career, I've had many instances and been in organizations where we've gone through the exercise of defining mission, vision, core values, and that work is good. I've always found core value work to be very valuable. I've often struggled through time with mission, vision. It feels like in many instances it's something that we've created in the headquarter boardroom, and it's more of a statement than it is really teasing out the true essence and nature of the organization. And that's why over time I've gravitated towards the concept of purpose work. So for me, purpose is less about defining and making a statement. It's more about actually observing and teasing out and capturing the essence of what an organization actually does and how people make their unique difference. There's a University of Michigan professor, Bob Quinn, who does a lot of writing on purpose, and he's got a recent book in the last year on it's called the Economics of Higher Purpose, and he makes the business case in that book for how a clearly defined purpose in an organization has a synergistic effect, a sort of 1 + 1 = 3 effect on performance and people feeling a part of something bigger than themselves. And so the reason for purpose for us, one observation I have since being here since February is we operate in a business that is supporting some of the most important events in individuals' early lives, and yet to walk the halls and interact with the team, it feels very transactional. It feels like we're just selling caps and gowns and yearbooks and that. And then when you actually talk to folks, one of the starkest examples, one of our leadership team members, she had a daughter graduate from high school and a son graduate from college this past spring. And when you talk to her about those events, she cannot tell you the story without being emotional about it because of how much it means. And yet we're missing that essence. And so for us, we're starting a piece of purpose work and a listening tour across our organization, because what we want to hear from people is why Herff Jones? Why are you here? What's the essence of how you make your difference? What else do you need to make your difference? Because a big believer, if you can capture that energy, there's a synergy that goes well beyond any daily job description or any element that you might otherwise have.
Great. Thank you for elaborating on the concept of purpose and the example with Herff Jones and how you're trying to define that there. Brent, is there something that also resonates with you around purpose? And again, anything that's sort of changed, not just really with COVID necessarily, but just in the last 5 or 10 years with higher education? Has Butler looked at that again as sort of understanding and reaffirming or perhaps amending what purpose means to the university?
Yeah, very much so. And it's one of the reasons why I returned to Butler to take on this role a couple of years ago. I hit the people piece early on with the leadership team and the Butler community, faculty, staff. I hit the place kind of element that was special to me in terms of my alma mater and Butler putting me, when I was a student, on a good path, both personally and professionally once I graduated. And then third is just the purpose-driven nature of what we do as an institution of higher education and the opportunity to kind of have a real-world impact through the lives of others. And when we take kind of culture surveys here with our faculty and staff, that purpose is right up kind of at the top. It's a unifying kind of factor in a lot of what we do in terms of what I've seen, whether it's with COVID or other strategic initiatives, to serve as kind of that guiding light that we're all here to support the best interests of our students and put them on a path to change the world in a positive way. So that's always first and foremost. COVID definitely presented challenges, operationally, because of just college campuses are built on increasing density, right? And then you had a virus where density was the enemy. So that was some challenges, but beyond kind of those operational challenges, it's accelerated some challenges within higher education that we saw coming over the past couple of years, just in terms of, we're a nonprofit, we're purpose-driven, but we also need to have profit on our minds as well, just in terms of the cost environment that we've seen kind of increasing and the investments that we made, not just in health and safety, but the technology investments to be able to deliver our academic programs in a variety of formats. So there was a significant IT investment there. Revenue is becoming more challenging. There's an impending decrease in college age students over the next few years. The landscape in higher education is becoming increasingly more competitive for college students. And then, there's this perception out there and kind of this myth around this deteriorating perception of the value of higher education, despite the overwhelming and strong evidence that an advanced degree leads to higher salaries, quality of life, and there's plenty of surveys that show that. And we see that kind of within our student data and the outcomes data, whether it's 1 year, 5 year, 10 years, or 30 years post-graduation. But kind of that myth is kind of, and that perception is out there. Another kind of element that Jeff has touched on is it's a very competitive workforce environment right now. So top of mind for our leadership team and myself is just our ability to be competitive in not only attracting, but retaining our key talent and our people, whether that's through compensation and benefits and kind of leadership opportunities. So those are some of the challenges that are top of mind. I think, from an institution of higher education, we are really kind of pride ourselves in being innovative, and the need is to transform quickly enough to adapt to the future needs and interests of our students. So we have kind of a tangible mission that President Danko has stated to boldly innovate and expansively kind of educate. And that's critical to our future work as we meet kind of the changing needs of our students. Whether that's more real world kind of practical experience and kind of questioning kind of and pushing the boundaries of who, how, and where we educate as an institution, providing access to all those who desire to pursue an education here at Butler. So there are a number of things that we've implemented to kind of adapt that I think has been accelerated through the pandemic. We have new kind of these articulation agreements with Ivy Tech to provide underserved students access to a bachelor's degree in our College of Education. We now have 40 three-year degree programs and created pathways for 10 additional existing programs. So a total of 50 where students can get their education kind of faster. We have a grant through the Lilly Endowment to help accelerate new models of education. We're launching new online programs. So there's a lot of things that we knew were there that we have been pursuing, but the pandemic has just really kind of accelerated the pace for change here at at Butler and across higher education.
Thanks, Brent. I think both you and Jeff talked a lot about the different stakeholders and whether it's faculty or in your case students, your degree-seeking students, and Jeff, the team members at Herf Jones, as well as the customers, and just how both of your respective organizations approach and try to meet the need short-term and long-term. There's a question here from the group. It says, with the tight labor market and competitive upper echelon, have either of you noticed a rise in veteran employees or veteran executives? I assume that means military, right?
Yeah, we haven't per se, but what I would say is that part of what we're rethinking is, what does the labor force really look like? And I'll give you a few examples. So pre-COVID, most companies were still thinking in terms of especially for senior management roles or leadership roles. Typically, they were in the home office, wherever that was located, and the vast preponderance of folks were gonna, if you took a new role, you were gonna move to that geography, city, whatever, in order to work there. Post-COVID, so we have national searches going on right now for Chief Revenue Officer, a new head of operations and supply chain, a new head of corporate communications, and a new CFO. And all of those searches are being done nationally, and we're indifferent to where they live. So long as they can travel, so long as they can be here when necessary. The Wall Street Journal, a couple of months ago, there was an article about their line at the end of the article was that being able to work virtually is the new signing bonus. So that's just one example of a dimension. In terms of the kinds of folks we recruit, the reality is sort of staying in a narrow lane, whether that's requiring people to move or recruiting certain types of professionals. I think those days are over. So I think the need to look at veterans, the need to look at, there's also been conventional wisdom that you get to a certain age and folks should be retiring or moving on. We're also seeing folks that are older in age not only stay in the workforce, but be very productive. We're seeing younger leaders. We're seeing people move up to leadership roles at a younger age than they might have in other times. I think veterans are an exceptional. We have a number of military veterans that work in our business. We have one individual who runs our Champ Ring business and just an outstanding leader because of the the tradition of leadership development that the military has. So very, very desirable. So I think it's a really interesting marketplace, and I think it's really good because I think there's a broader view of what talent is. I think there's also an ability to recruit talent more broadly when you start to break down some of those barriers.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, no, please, go right ahead. I was going to ask Brent, just as in the context of, you mentioned several new programs or innovative ways you're looking to roll out education at Butler. Has that also impacted the breadth and depth of how you're approaching your faculty and administration staffing?
Yeah, very much so. We know, people are core of what we do, and we know that our outstanding kind of faculty and our staff, especially our staff that serves students, is priority number one in terms of recruiting kind of students to come here, and that's part of the special experience and kind of access to outstanding kind of people. So that is a key priority for us going forward. There are definitely challenges that Jeff has outlined in the labor market, but I share his belief that there are great opportunities both for the employer, but then also for the employee as well. For the employer, as Jeff mentioned, with this kind of hybrid work environment now, that is something that's new for Butler that we've embraced. We've seen the success of working remotely over the past year and a half. Now we're an on-campus kind of in-person experience for the most part. So we're never going to be fully remote because we need to be here serving students. But where it makes sense, whether that's in marketing or IT or other roles, to have this experience to where we have increased productivity, allowing kind of a hybrid work environment. And then to Jeff's point, it allows us to kind of tap into a kind of a larger kind of pool of candidates. And then from the employee side, we have access to these kind of opportunities to work in this environment where ultimately I like where it's kind of a meritocracy to where, as a manager, I've never been concerned with somebody clocking in at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock every day and then 5. I'm more concerned with productivity and kind of getting work done. And I've seen that play out here, but also in other industries as well, and really valuing top talent. So I know a key concern of mine that we're taking action on is, I have a unique role as chief of staff where I work across the entire organization, and I have been able to identify who are the key talent is at Butler University, make sure that we're retaining them, giving them leadership kind of opportunities to kind of feel fulfilled and pursue their career here. So that is something that we've taken some steps on. But I know one of the things that we spoke about yesterday, Steve, was the fact that for this audience here, you have college students, young professionals. There is so much opportunity for all of you as you enter the workforce. I mean, I just see, I am craving for leaders and problem solvers, regardless of level. You don't have to have a big title to be a leader. Anybody can be a leader. And an early boss of mine that I've had was, he gave me this advice of leadership without authority. Take responsibility, take ownership, and be a leader regardless of what your title is. And I've seen that play out here at Butler, to where we have a young professional who is in our manager of insurance. He is a great leader and has some of these kind of softer skills around EQ and kind of leadership. So I tasked him to lead one of our health and safety kind of work groups where it wasn't kind of a natural progression for him. And he kind of rose to that occasion. I'm looking for more people like that to put in where they can take on these great leadership roles. So I look at this audience and think, what a great time, despite the challenges that are out there, for you all to enter the workforce, whether it's a hybrid work environment, but really to have career and leadership opportunities to have an impact, because it's very much needed in this market, probably more than I've ever seen in my career.
Yeah, I would just build on that. Our mantra is leaders wanted. So we can't get enough leaders, and leaders at every role. And I know the conventional wisdom has traditionally been, you gotta start in an entry level role and put in your time and get experience before you can quote lead. I think those days are gone forever. And what you all should be looking for is opportunities to assume leadership roles, not only in things you might be doing involved in on campus and with Alpha Kappa Psi, but also as you enter the workforce. And I would absolutely be looking for places of employment and challenges that resonate with that opportunity to lead, because the average business today cannot wait for somebody to have 5 or 10 or more years of experience to be a leader.
Thank you both for those thoughts about sort of the optimism that you have around the opportunities that are facing, leadership to young leaders today, professionals today. There was a question, and I wanted to sort of close out the conversation today by asking both of you, Jeff and Brent. You've both talked about the pressure of the business success, right? Jeff, certainly with you mentioned the cost, you mentioned trying to get focused on purpose, increased cost of labor and materials, the business, running the business, the challenges of running the business. And Brent, you had mentioned sort of the shift that Butler was making in new programs. And my question is, how do you balance some of those difficult and tough goals relative to the business with the concept of servant leadership? What does that mean to you? Because oftentimes, and maybe sometimes, servant leadership is misunderstood, and it doesn't have accountability, or it lacks clarity and purpose. And I'm curious of how you both would define and approach that. And then, if there's anything else there is a question on the chat about is remote working part of the new normal? I think you both addressed that a little bit in both your responses. But if you'd like to also jump in and address that, and then the question on servant leadership, and we can close it out.
Sure. I'm happy to lead. Let me answer the second part of that question first. I think that hybrid work is the new normal, and I think that's a good thing. We're all going to have to figure it out, because the reality is I don't think it's going to be organizations that are 100% remote and never meet, and because there's still a need to be in person, to interact, to role model, to do a lot of things. But what I do love about it, and we're certainly a supporter when we do come back in January, ours will be a hybrid environment. We're still defining exactly what that means, because there does have to be some parameters for it. But what I think it does is I think it gives you access to greater talent. I think it also reflects the fact that people have complicated, busy lives, and they need flexibility. And so I think it's enriching the work environment and ultimately productivity and attraction of talent. So I think it's here to stay, and I think that's a good thing. And there's a whole bunch of things we're going to have to figure out along the way. One of the things we're struggling with right now is pre-COVID, important meetings were typically in person. During COVID, they were all online. We're now finding ourselves doing hybrid meetings, and we haven't figured out the technology, because it doesn't work very well. So, we're buying owls, and we're trying a bunch of things to figure out how to have hybrid meetings. So there's going to be a lot of learning along the way. In terms of servant leadership, the way you balance, my view on it has been Robert Greenleaf and some of his writings along the way, he defined some of the important characteristics of servant leadership from his viewpoint for organizations. And the very first one on the list intentionally was that an organization has to be profitable. So he was very clear-eyed. He was a business person. He spent his entire career at AT&T in leadership development. And he was very clear that in a capitalist society, businesses have to be have to be sustainable and have to be successful before they can really do any good. So, part of the way servant leadership influences my own view on making decisions is we're making decisions for the long term. We're making decisions for the sustainability of the organization and the handoff to whoever will steward it over the next step. And especially at a place like Herff Jones, where we're a 101-year-old company, we will all have been here as a leadership team for a short part of that journey. And our goal is to hand it off sustainably to the next group that will take it forward.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. I had a mentor of mine early on that used to say, no margin, no mission, as a way of saying the same thing that
Absolutely.
you mentioned. Greenleaf's comment about the organization has to be profitable. No margin, no mission. Brent, how about your thoughts on servant leadership?
Yeah, I really like that framework. And in fact, there was a mentor of mine that I had kind of a while ago when I was at kind of business school. And, he actually was the CEO of Medtronic, which is a very successful medical device company, kind of Bill George. And he's written books on kind of servant leadership. And he helped kind of formulate kind of some of my thinking on it. And it's this very kind of simplified kind of framework of kind of, when you make decisions as a leader, there are kind of three things you need to factor into it. One is the economic. Just as Jeff, you mentioned, you need to have a profit. Steve, I love kind of no margin, no mission, right? So you need to be sustainable from an economic standpoint. So that's one. A second is kind of legal, right? And there's legal constructs of what you can and can't do. And I've thought through jobs I've had in the past of managing an investor relations program for a publicly traded company, where that was always a priority for me of not breaking any kind of SEC regulations, mostly unintentionally. So there's that kind of legal framework. But then there's perhaps most importantly, is the ethical kind of construct as well. Just because something may be high on the list economically or even kind of legally, it may not be kind of the right thing to do. So as you're kind of building kind of your career or an enterprise, a sustainable enterprise, you want to have kind of all three of those in mind, kind of the economic, the legal, and kind of the ethical framework. And I just jotted this down. And I don't know if this will come across, but you kind of see kind of these frameworks here where you think of the three kind of constructs as circles. And then there's this spot in the middle where they kind of all overlap with one another. So that's the theory I've tried to keep in my mind of, all right, when I make decisions and when I want to be a servant leader, kind of serving kind of a multitude of stakeholders, whether it was in a publicly traded company with shareholders, whether it's with employees or stakeholders, and doing the right thing in the communities that we operate in, that you want to have kind of that construct where you feel good economically, legally, and kind of ethically in decision making. And kind of related to that, as I've seen in my career, I have this other kind of simple construct of kind of knowing the good, right? Kind of in your mind. And most people can differentiate right from wrong. So that's kind of step one. You got to know the good. Step two is kind of loving the good in your heart, kind of really embracing kind of those values. But then the third step is with your hands, right? You go from the brain knowing the good, your heart loving the good, and then your hands doing the good. And the challenge that I have had, and I think most people have, is that transition from heart to hand. And there are so many impediments and barriers where people don't kind of put the values into practice. It could be fear, right, of failure. It could be, well, I'm not a leader, or I'm insecure. I don't feel like I can do this. But if you are kind of mission driven or you're purpose driven, and you have that values framework, you know the good, love the good. My biggest piece of advice to kind of all of you is kind of take that risk, go out there and do the good in the world and put it into practice. It's a skill. And it's no different than, you watch, I'm a big basketball fan, like Steph Curry shooting the basketball, right? He's good, not from studying and watching film. He's good because he puts it into practice and probably shoots 5,000 shots a day. So as a leader, you're not going to develop unless you do the good and put it into practice. So that's kind of going a little bit off script here, but that's my kind of parting thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. I love that. Know the good, love the good, do the good, head, heart, and hands. I'm surprised you didn't get a Haywood reference in there. A good Butler grad as far as the shooters go, right?
Yeah, I should have. Yeah, let's scrap Steph Curry. I'll go with Gordon Hayward.
Make sure we get the Bulldogs a little plug in there at the end, right?
Thank you.
Jeff, Brent, thank you so much for getting us launched off today. Great messages. I really appreciate the insights, and hope that you'll consider joining us again. I do think one point I would like to just underscore from your comments. I think going back to the idea of being purpose driven and being having values to fall back to. I think that's sort of the root, Brent, of your final comments there about knowing the good, loving the good, and doing the good. And I also wanted to throw in there that I think as a fraternal organization or a membership organization in general, that's where I think we can fall back on our community of like thinkers, or in this case, for AK Psi, our community of brothers about supporting each other. Brent, as you were saying, trying to make that transition from thinking about it to doing it and taking those chances and relying on the community and the support. And that's a big part of us too. And I think also you mentioned being a Sigma Chi. I'm sure that's a lot of what falls back to as well as a fraternal organization. So again, thank you both for your time today. I know we went a little bit over, but again, thank you both.